Hey, welcome to another week of On the Hook. I'm your host, Keith Pape. We're going to go through my meandering thought of the week, and this week it's really about the culture that Mitch and I wanted to bring into YellowPike when we first got started. How has it been affected over the 9 years that we've been doing this? What was our ideas about transparency? And we'll talk about the internal side of that and the external side of that, the work-life balance side. And how does that work from the perspective of, the work you're doing or, the work of the staff, the ownership and leadership and working and profitability, just kind of all the sides of it. I just want to talk through all of those because there's things that I will stop and think about occasionally that I'll even forget that the reason why I made that decision early on, what it was, what it meant, why it was important. Sometimes you get a little far from it and you forget what was the reasoning. And sometimes you have to make sure that reasoning is still valid or that you haven't kind of lost the reasoning for it along the way. And it's still a good idea. You're just not executing it in the same way or the environment's changed. On family, and I think that's where I want to start first. When Mitch and I were first talking about it, it was, a reflection on the last several places that we'd worked, the improvements we wanted to make. We really enjoyed the other places that we worked, but we're like, how can we do better? And at the time, our concept of family was, I want to treat you like somebody that I care about deeply. I think that the world's changed a little bit, even just in these 9 years on kind of born family versus, chosen family. But I think that the labels don't change the intent of what we were thinking, which was all about making sure to treat people with the respect that we want to be treated with and make sure that we're providing an environment that is, effective, loving, and caring. What we saw was when you're in a company, a lot of times it's solely about profitability. It's solely about go to work, punch in, punch out from the work side, and it's profitability and hours tracking, cash flow from the leadership or ownership side. You have all those pieces in a family. Families still have to have money. You have to go to work. Bills have to be paid. Kids get grounded. Parents make mistakes. These are all the different elements that are included in a family. And we saw that it could be applied effectively in the business. It's supposed to be a sign of respect in both directions. Now, what we've found over the last couple of years that's been interesting is we got feedback that the term family was no longer, I don't want to use the word appreciated. I'm trying to think the word that I thought of, but it wasn't seen as a positive. My first response was anger because I'd put so much effort, personally. But what I realized, and it's funny, one of the ideas that came to me was those HR seminars you have to take once a year, once every couple of years, wherever you work. They talk about it's not what your intention was, it's how is it received by the person that hears it, sees it, or experiences it. And I started thinking about that, and I'm like, well, it doesn't, just because labels change, times change, culture changes, and just because a label changes doesn't mean that my intentions aren't positive. What I'm using, either an outdated word or a label that is the definition has changed for it. People make fun of it all the time. Is every year Merriam-Webster puts out the updated definitions or new words being added to the dictionary, and some people, the get off my lawn crowd are like, you can't add words to the dictionary. That's already the English language. You're ruining it. You're not ruining it. It's changing over time. A good example I heard of that once was the fact that if you truly went back in a time machine to Shakespeare, you actually wouldn't understand or be able to hold a conversation with William Shakespeare, even though he speaks English, because English has changed so much over time. So what I started getting to was, okay, if that's my thought process, then it doesn't change that I want to treat people with respect. It just changes what this word of family means, and I just have to change my labeling, but I never have to change my intention. So it's been really interesting to come back around on that and being able to still have a culture that is relevant to what our goals were, but be able to change the way we approach it and still treat people the same. And one of the concerns is the word family has become almost the reality TV version, or the, for the old people, the Leave It the Beaver version, where it's this glorified, glossy perfection, where families are actually, pretty messy. Can't count the number of people that I know that haven't spoken to somebody that they know that's part of their family, and they haven't spoken to them in 10 years. They've literally fired their family members, and they've taken on a whole new set of people who traditionally would be called close friends, and they say, no, this is my chosen family. And I thought that through, and I'm like, okay, so family has to be equally understood and accepted in both directions. So it's okay for, you who's kind of on the receiving end of a business to fire your birth family, which also means it's okay for me to have to changes to the family that we have. And we've certainly seen that. And I think it's one of the toughest things about being an owner, where you want to go and have this really great culture, is that sometimes things go wrong. And I mean, I'll be the first to say, that both the advertising and marketing industry, as well as, or maybe even more so, the video game industry has gone through massive turnover the last 2 years. And because of that, we've had layoffs like everybody else has. And you can see the look on people's faces. And it's that look of, did you just betray the idea of family? And it's guttingly painful. But I also have to remember that in real families, shit happens. Things go bad. You have to separate yourself from people, even not because they did something bad, but because something happened, something changed. And it's hard to do, but it's still the right thing to do. I know horrible layoffs happen, and there's some horrible corporations out there that, the CEO got a $10 million bonus, and they had $1 billion in profits, and they're doing layoffs. Those companies don't call themselves families. I'm talking about the unique companies out there who culturally, that's their goal. The goal is a family style. And that's not Global 50s for the most part. Maybe there's some out there, but there's a difference. And I think it's making sure to take all the use cases, and emotions always get high. But in a really crazy environment like we've had the last year or two, and it looks like we're going to have here for the near future, I'm reminding myself that the idea isn't perfection, but great intent. When Mitch and I were talking, definitely over having some pie, a little bit of food. Those you know me know that there's food always involved. Our next word that kept on coming to us was transparency. And again, I think a lot of this comes from the last couple companies that we worked at, or companies I'd run before. Again, I struggle with the dictionary side of it only because it feels like authenticity and transparency have become so massively overused in the last couple of years. The intent is good, but I've also had a bunch of lessons learned. So the easy side of it is we've tried to make sure to talk to the staff on an ongoing basis on the reality of what's going on, what sales are happening, what we're looking for in staffing, down to what events we're going to have this year and what parties, and hey, should we take this holiday off or this holiday off? Should we take the day after Thanksgiving, or should we take the week before? Some of them are silly and some of them are super serious. The concept is that it's always a wider discussion. The learning, I think, on that side was, don't bog people down with every single thing that we can make decisions in a smaller group. The joke that this meeting could have been an email. Now, I think the hardest part internally, I think, between kind of leadership or ownership and staff, from a transparency standpoint, is when it comes to money. And the hard part you're going to run into, and this is something that I had to really sit and think about the first company that I ever launched. And one of my greatest learnings then, and I'm now starting to apply to the team internally, and I think it's starting to help, is when you start talking about money from a company perspective, the number of commas involved is more. The numbers are more, the financials are bigger, but your costs are bigger also. And that's just not normal in most people's lives. I know before I started running companies, there was one comma in my checkbook, in my bank account, and it rarely got, to one comma. A lot of times it was less than that. So when you start having a company and you start working deals that are in the 6, 7 figures, and you start heading towards 7 and 8 figures in revenue, those numbers are almost, inconceivable to the average staff member. It's just because it's not part of their life. So when you see a large deal come in, when you are starting to talk transparently about numbers, sometimes there isn't a relevance, there isn't a foundational place for them to work from, because it feels like, oh, you brought in $1 million. We now have enough money forever. Of course, the reality is, the people that are on the leadership side are staring at bank accounts and bills and payroll and rent and these things, and it all goes very quickly. But it's just, there isn't a reconciliation. Ooh, look, I even used accounting word. They'll be so happy about that. The part is to slowly talk through them and do some math. Now you don't have to do massive PowerPoints or do whiteboards all the time to explain it, but to tie it together in some way, so that way they understand how far business finances go. We carry it across the aisle to the client side as well. And it's funny, it's the same idea, but it's executed in a much different way. Our standard is, when talking to clients, is that everything is completely transparent, providing an unrequested audit of everything we do, both from an effort perspective and also from a dollars and comma perspective. One of our lessons learned, though, is not every organization is built for that. Almost all the time, our contacts really appreciate it. Being able to understand, exactly how much a creator made, exactly understand how much effort it took to make that commercial or trailer. What did it take for the artist to actually execute on that? They find it hugely helpful. But they'll be honest sometimes, saying, "But my finance and accounting team is not built that way." They will target you for things that they don't find value in, even though it's the reason why you delivered the quality you did. They look at it from a different perspective. So we'll see clients who are, yep, let's pass on all that transparency. And we'll have clients that say, great, give me that information, but in all formal documentation, please keep it summarized, because they have a reality of a system that they have to work in. And sometimes it was tough for us early on to kind of shift gears, because now you have to keep track of which organizations can, how do we make sure that we're living up to the transparency, making sure that we are being accountable in the same way, we're living our lives the same transparent way, even if it doesn't pass on. And I think it pays off. We've seen over time, sometimes work goes away because somebody gets shiny object somewhere else, but multiple times they've come back, and sometimes it's years later going, we missed that transparency. We missed that level of detail that you thought was important. We want to go back to that. And I think if you can work both sides, where your team and your vendors, the people who are supporting you, you can be as transparent as humanly possible with them, with the education and the explanation, and again, everything takes more time. It is so much easier to throw a number out there and say, deal with it, run with it. It's much harder to go and say, here's why, let me explain it. I see the look on your face, let's talk it through, let me make it relevant to you, or to a client going, okay, great, we've got 7 clients currently, and all 7 of them have a different level of transparency that they can accept in their organization. So now we have to do things 7 different ways, which is difficult on us, but it makes us a value to our partners, to our clients. There's so many great companies out there that have amazing creative, or they have amazing account services, or they have the best price. But it's really hard to being willing to do a lot of small things that clients never see, things that the staff spend more time on, or you spend more time on, so the staff can understand it. It's not the easy way to go, but I really feel after 9 years that Mitch would agree with me that it's also been the key to our success. And then the one that I think caught me off guard the most was the balance side. Pre-COVID, I think we all were working from just a different scale. We thought we were a really balanced organization. When somebody really needed it, they worked from home, but as a creative organization where, kind of like we talked about, because the transparency is so much extra work, everything we do is very collaborative because, one of our little fancy sayings, and you'll see it on the website, is handcrafted at scale. But what we found out as we went into lockdown, and we're mostly based in California, so our lockdown was from March of 20 until August of 21. So we had a long lockdown in California. And we absolutely went through some really interesting experiments. It affected everybody very differently. When we came out of COVID, the concept of balance started making more sense to us, because we did see the benefits of that time, especially, I think, say we're in Los Angeles, which I think I mentioned earlier, and our lives, pre-COVID especially, was about your commute. It was, here's how many hours you're using on the road every day, and then here's how many hours you're spending at work, which pre-COVID, it was very normal in an agency world to be 8, 10, 12 hours at work. One of the places I was at before we started YellowPike, we were absolutely 9 a.m., no later than 10 a.m. in, and no leaving before 7 p.m. That was an absolute minimum day, plus your commute time. So as we came out of COVID, we really started talking about, what have we learned? What's missing? What's worked and what hasn't worked? And, one of our big takeaways was, one, as a creative endeavor, and, as an advertising agency doing a creative execution, creativity as a group was so much more powerful than a writer's room over a Zoom. But for us, almost more importantly, the lack of interaction by young staff. We realized that the water cooler discussions, the senior discussions happening in and around young staff were so important to our development when we were younger, and we saw young staff during lockdown who, didn't matter whether you turned a Zoom on for 8 hours a day or what methods we tried, it wasn't the same as young staff being able to just, absorb and listen to senior staff and get some of those learnings from them, to be able to ask questions, to be able to just be a fly on the wall and absorb that information. So when we first came back, we got a new office, great space. We're able to be creative. We're able to do so many more production kind of things that we couldn't do at our old space. And we started with 1 day a week. And we said, okay, we're going to go and make sure that the writer's room gets done on the day in the office. And then things started coming back more, and work kept on building, and discussion on things that take hands, things that take interaction in real time. And we ended up with 2 and then 3 days. And I think it took us probably about a year to get to 3 days. And then what we found was the flow around us, the meetings with clients, the time it took to have, creative rooms, to have interactions together to get the best ideas out, really did flatten out at 3 days. And then we were able to still maintain 2 days at home, which is Thursday and Friday. So you, in essence, have 4 days straight at home with your family. You have both the benefit of walking the dog, picking up the kids from school, but you also have the reduced stress of not driving. You have dedicated time where you can really stare at a spreadsheet or do research, do things that you need to do. So both the work side and the personal side benefited, but not at the expense of the quality creative that we did in those first 3 days. Everybody also agreed that 2 days made sure that work was getting done. I'm sure you've all been there where you've had a full day at the office. You spent most of it at in a conference room or multiple conference rooms, and you got to the end of your day and you said, all right, now I've had a full day of meetings. Now I have to start doing my work. And there's nothing more frustrating than that. And in spite of all the changes, that balance has really played out well for us. We've seen an increase in the creative that we're doing. We've seen an improvement in the scheduling of people who are parents and making sure to see kids' plays and shows, and a respect for the 3 days in office really are a deep focus on collaboration, and having the same respect for the home days on let's get work done and let's make sure to go and get that quality family time. It's one of the things I would have never seen coming pre-COVID, but it's a balance that I've had to, I've had arguments with folks at GDC or at DICE or at Gamescom who were usually mid to senior level who said, I never want to go into an office ever again. I don't need it. And the point that I'm always making to people is, of course you don't need it. You're way too experienced to ever need that, unless your personality is one that really enjoys a collaborative environment. You have to be around people, which I'm one of those people. I like it. But the overall purpose isn't for you, isn't for the person with 5, 6, 7, 10 years of experience. Not at all. It goes back to what I said about the young staff earlier. Where are they getting the interaction? Where do they get the osmosis of being around older, more senior people and hearing your discussions, hearing your why, hearing how you got to a decision? We didn't just magically learn those things when we were young. We learned it because we were around others and we asked questions, and sometimes we just sat and listened. Sometimes we were the person that just got the coffee, but in between getting the coffee and taking the notes, we heard all those discussions going on, and we slowly absorbed that information. So it's like, I think balance was a great way to wrap up kind of why do we start YellowPike? What have I learned from the seven companies I've started before? What have I learned from the places that Mitch and I have worked at previously? How can we constantly strive to make things better? And then the challenge we're having now, of course, is to make sure to change with the times where it makes sense. And sometimes those changes are just labels, and some changes are because things are simply different. But sometimes we just have to think about why we made that decision originally, because you do get caught up in the day-to-day part of the business, getting work done, hiring people, bringing in new deals. You get caught up in that and you're like, why did I come up with these pillars originally? So my ending thought is, I find this as useful as I hope you find it. It helps me remember things, helps me stay focused. So if you have a chance, please like, subscribe, share, all those fun things. And I'm already thinking about the next one. All right, I'll see you soon.